So, in this program here, yeah. Do you want the light on? Okay, so I'll turn it off after I introduce you.
Okay.
There's a toggle here. I'll turn it off.
Okay.
Like I said, you can take the microphone off the.
Let's see, where's the clicker?
Oh, I didn't. Look.
Does this stream out through the Pentagon Forces radio? Right. It's over in Korea. It's all over. There's one guy that comes to our events. He works at the Nicaragua Embassy. He's Dallas from Nicaragua.
We get some from, we got one from Brazil, Venezuela. Another South American country too. Can't remember which one.
Big Ben.
You said you wanted us to go for 4 hours.
Yes, we're doing a Ben.
We are at 2 days, 56 right now.
In the world, go home and read slash all your questions.
Good evening, everyone.
Hello.
Welcome.
Is this on?
Okay. Now it's on. Well, welcome to the February program of the Scottsdale Civil War Roundtable. For those of you who I've not yet met, I'm Mark Stoller, I'm president of the Roundtable. There's a few announcements before we get started with our speaker program. We have a history discussion group that will be taking place next Thursday, February 28th. These are informal member-facilitated discussions, and the topic is going to be military discipline during the Civil War. You can come to listen, have fun and relaxed atmosphere. It's very casual. The meeting starts at 6:30 and takes place at Panera Bread at the intersection of Scottsdale and Indian School Road, where they've given us a room for ourselves. And we've had some great sessions the last few months. So I hope you can join us. I hope you all saw the announcement of next season's schedule in the February Grape Shot. If not, I wanted to highlight that our Ed Barr's Memorial Lecture speaker next January will be Gary Gallagher. So we're thrilled and excited to have him here. He does not do a lot of roundtable events. Those of you who've been attending for a long time have seen Gary frequently on the DVDs that we play before our meetings. I wanted to mention I made a visit last week to the Pioneer Cemetery Memorial Park in downtown Phoenix, which operated from 1884 to 1914. It's maintained by volunteers with a keen interest in local history. Ed Dobbins, is Ed here? I saw you earlier. Yeah. Ed Dobbins gave me a tour along with several other of the volunteers there. I made the visit because I've been meeting with Steve Schumacher, who's the city historian of Phoenix. I met through a member of the Roundtable, and like Scottsdale, which was founded by a Civil War veteran, Phoenix's founders were mostly Civil War veterans also, both Union and Confederate. And a couple of them are buried at Pioneer, and it's a worthwhile place to visit. So I recommend it. Tomorrow morning, the Roundtable will have a booth for the first time at the Scottsdale Senior Expo at the Center for the Performing Arts across the street here. We'll be there from 9 to 1, and if you're in the area and like to stop by, we'd be happy to see you there. This is part of our expanded outreach efforts to recruit new members. If you see or are aware of any opportunities in other communities in the Valley, please let us know. We're happy to go out and talk to groups and to make presentations. So those of us on the board are happy to do that. We also now have an Instagram presence. So in addition to our YouTube channel, our website, and Facebook, just search on Scottsdale Civil War Roundtable if you do use Instagram, and you'll find information about us. It's another way we're trying to reach out to people who might not know about the group. Our thanks to Roundtable members John and Julie Taylor for setting this up for us. We also have a couple of guests with us tonight that I wanted to introduce. How many of you attended the Don Bluth Theater performance of Ben Butler last May? Okay. Well, Keith Hall, who gave us a rousingly good and memorable and funny performance as Ben Butler's with us tonight. Keith, would you stand up for just a minute just to say hi to everybody? He looks a lot different. he has hair. And he looks a bit younger too. It was really a terrific event. And who thought you could make a comedy about Ben Butler? The Scottsdale Library is our valued partner, without which we would not have access to this wonderful auditorium and all the support we get from the library. Michael Beck is the new head of the Scottsdale Public Library System. He's just been here, a month, I think. So Mike, would you just step up and introduce yourself?
Thank you. I just want to say it's great to be back in Scottsdale. For those of you that have been long-serving members, you may have realized me from my first stint when I was the Adult Services Coordinator from 2012 to 2014, but I'm happy to be back as your director. I'm also excited of our partnership that we have with the Roundtable. You know, I have a genuine love of history growing up in the South. Also, my undergraduate degree was in history education. And then also I had ancestors that fought in the Civil War too. So I also have a genuine interest in this group, and I'm glad that we are a part of this partnership. I hope you enjoyed tonight's speaker, Dr. Schrader. And again, I want to thank Mark for the opportunity to speak. And please let me know if there's anything that Terrence or I can do as your liaisons or advocates. We appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thanks, Mike. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to David Ward, our program chair, to introduce our speaker.
All right, good evening, everybody. And when you come to the Scottsdale Civil War Roundtable, it's sort of like double feature night at the movies. We show our video at 5 to 6 o'clock, and then we have a live speaker from 6 to 7. So you get two shows for the price of one. And it's appropriate, therefore, to give you a preview of our coming attractions. Next month, Steve Cowie is coming out from Maryland, going to tell us all about the aftermath of the Battle of Antietam, what confronted the civilian farmers in Sharpsburg, and how badly did the battlefield smell with the dead bodies and the carcasses of the dead mules and horses. So it should be a fun talk. And in April, a friend of mine from Virginia, Fauquier County, the heart of Colonel John Mosby's Confederacy, will be with us. Eric Buckland, he's an expert on Colonel Mosby, so he's going to tell us all about the famous Gray Ghost from Virginia. And in May, Mark Bielski will be with us from New Orleans. He recently wrote a book on the 1862 Battle of New Orleans, not the more famous battle that defined the War of 1812 with Andrew Jackson. This is the war that will introduce Benjamin Butler to New Orleans, which you'll hear a little bit more about later tonight. So let me, before I introduce our speaker, just give you some thoughts here before we have Dr. Schrader take the podium. And the American Civil War featured a number of generals who are not trained at West Point. Three of them readily come to mind: Blackjack Logan, John Fremont, Nathaniel Banks. They were all prominent politicians in civil life, and they supported the Republican Party. Another man, a lawyer from Lowell, Massachusetts, can also be neatly aligned with this group, and that's our featured subject tonight, Benjamin Butler. The General-in-Chief, Henry Halleck, famously stated one time, "It seems but little better than murder to give important commands to such men as Banks, Butler, McLarnin, and Ben-Hur Wallace, but it seems impossible to prevent it." The military success of this handful of political generals will always provide hours of debate for historians and students of the war. Perhaps, however, all of us can agree that the most colorful of this group, without a doubt, was Ben Butler. For modern civil warriors, Butler is perhaps best known to us by his two memorable nom de guerres, Beast Butler and Spoons Butler. Both of these colorful nicknames were bestowed upon him principally by the Southern ladies of New Orleans. The first was coined in response to Butler's infamous Order Number 28, which was issued to revoke the protected status held by women under the social mores of the time. The extra degree of respect due a lady, regardless of her provocation. Under General Order 28, if a woman uttered any insult or showed contempt toward a Union soldier, the usual social standards no longer applied. And she could be retaliated against, either verbally or physically, as if she were a common prostitute. Butler also earned the nickname Spoons when he confiscated a silver set from a woman passing through the Union lines. But the ladies of New Orleans, they exacted their revenge on Butler. They stenciled his image on the bottom of their chamber pots. As a general, Butler is most noted for his failures. His May 1864 operation, known as the Bermuda 100 Campaign, ended in his being bottled up outside of Richmond along a bend in the James River. Later that year, in an attempt to storm Fort Fisher, Butler sought to use a naval vessel loaded with black powder to storm and blow up Fort Fisher on the North Carolina coast. This proved to be a colossal failure, and many dubbed it as the powder boat fiasco. In fact, once informed of this operation and its failure, Grant had had enough of Ben Butler. While the nicknames and the military failures might define him for many of us, there is much more to Butler's biography. And it's a pleasure to have with us tonight Dave Schrader, who's investigated Butler's civil and military career. And he's a well-known person and speaker on the California Civil War Roundtable circuit. And I'm pleased to have him with us tonight. So please welcome Dr. Dave Schrader.
He wasn't that bad. All right, my job tonight is to entertain you for an hour with a few things that I found by reading. Now, I know this group's kind of young. Do any of you know who Paul Harvey was? I knew you would. What was his tagline? The rest of us. So my goal in all the talks that I give is to try to go one level deeper and go to some original quotes about the people that maybe you know the surface level about, and give you at least 3 takeaways that you'll chuckle out loud about and take home with you. My style is to go pretty fast. If you're the kind of person at school that needed to read every line on every page of anything, I will probably frustrate you with this talk, but you can freely ask me for the slides afterwards. My email is pretty easy. It's drdaveshrader@gmail.com. Okay, deal?
Yeah.
Okay, I think you already got the abstract. Much of the information, the 2 best books, there are many books, are this one. The review notes just up front says this is a pro-Butler book, and you aren't going to find too many of those. So if you like to read the other side of the story, the rest of the story, I would highly recommend this one. And then, of course, the bulk of the slides are going to be about the adventures in New Orleans. And I want you to walk away with a little bit of sympathy with what he walked into and how much he was able to accomplish in this book. We'll cover that topic in spades. So those are 2 of the best things. What do you already know about Butler? David already talked about the Beast. He played a big role right off the bat and hugely appreciated by Lincoln for helping to rescue Washington, D.C. from being taken over. He did get labeled as a political general. I would say generally, having watched a lot of the source material, he was a good planner and idea guy and a terrible execution person. Do you know any people like that? So he's a bungler. There's a little bit of a problem, not often proven, because he was a lawyer, a very clever lawyer, that he was corrupt. But he was also, and people don't highlight that he was a family man. His daughter helped him with his 900-page autobiography. She lived long. He married an actress wife. So despite his personal appearance, managed to find a very beautiful wife. The talk will go through these topics. We'll go from the early years to his lawyer years to being in the militia, Civil War, Fort Monroe, New Orleans, Bermuda 100, Fort Fisher. But I won't go much into the battles. And then we'll talk about what happened to him afterwards. Okay? So that's the deal. Ready to go?
Yep.
Okay, he was born in Deerfield, New Hampshire, as the 3rd of 3 kids. His dad had died in the Caribbean of yellow fever. Note the name is Benjamin Franklin Butler, and his brother was Andrew Jackson Butler. We'll talk about Andrew. He was cross-eyed. And people, do you know what phrenology is? It's reading your personality from the bumps on your head, I think. People predicted that the lad possessed latent disorders that would manifest themselves. Oh, did they ever? He could read at a very early age, very smart kid. At age 9, he was small, but got called a little cockeyed devil by somebody, so he wailed on him with a stick. He was known as the dirtiest, sauciest, lyingest child, and nobody could lie like him. And by the age 10 in Lowell, his mom was running a boarding house, and he stole from some of the boarders, and that began his, quote, career of larceny. So this gives you an idea of Ben as a small child. Abraham Lincoln even commented, I guess you don't see things the way other people do. Even biographers. So Bruce Catton wrote, he's grinning sardonically with eyes that don't mesh, revolving monstrous ambitions in his mind. You know, a whole soul of lack of scruple. So pretty harsh. His mom wanted to be a clergyman. He wanted to go to West Point, but he could not get into West Point. He actually was pretty small. When he graduated from college, he was only 97 pounds. Because of not getting into West Point, he always felt like he wanted to show the West Point guys a thing or two with his military planning skills. So he went to Colby College. He was not particularly religious, despite his mom's aspirations for him. Didn't go to chapel, got demerits. At the end, he got interested in law and owed the school money. And he wondered if he could file a lawsuit against the school just to hold off the payment scheme. So that gives an idea of where he was headed. He studied under a fairly famous lawyer. Usually would take 3 years of reading to get your law license, but he tried it 2 years, and a judge asked him to listen to the case. Ben came back and said, "You got the outcome wrong." That's pretty cocky, right? But the judge went and looked things up and found that Ben was right, and he actually got his degree in 2 years, or his license. So he was not really too above board as a lawyer, and I'll give you an example next. So the employment practices in his hometown of Lowell were that it was pretty harsh. Women could not move very quickly, very easily. He fought the mill owners. He also fought for limiting work to 11.25 hours a day, for which he was known as a friend of labor. And he basically said, if I'm not for you, I'm going to be against you. And because of his reputation, that brought in even business from both sides of the equation, which was his ultimate goal. But in the case of one of the mills, in order to pay for unpaid wages, he could attach a piece of property. So if you were the lawyer, what would you attach? The water wheel. Without the water wheel, can't really do much. His caseload went up. He had partners and was trying 4 more cases than anybody else in Boston. So that gives you an idea of his practice. He was initially a Democrat. He supported Southern rights, not slavery, but Southern rights to secede. He was in the Massachusetts State House and was the only senator in the Massachusetts Senate who was a Democrat. He ran for governor and lost, but he was a delegate to the first Democratic National Convention in Charleston, which was the divided convention where they re-met in Baltimore. He was initially a Breckinridge fan, and then because he had met and believed that Jefferson Davis could hold things together, he voted for him 50 rounds, and then that convention picked Breckinridge. Later on, he switched and was part of the Radical Republican caucus, if you know what that was, when he got to Congress. And then he switched back to Democrat, and then he even ran for president. And I'll show you that in a little bit. I would call him opportunistic. On top of all of his lawyering, though, he got involved in the militia. So his aspirations, having not gone to West Point, showed up here. So the governor at one point tried to disband the militia, and Ben didn't like that, so he's going to threaten a lawsuit. So the governor, being also clever, tried to reorganize the districts to gerrymander him out of it. Instead, Butler waited for the restructuring to go through and then convinced enough people that he shouldn't just be a colonel, he should be a brigadier general, and up the ranks he goes. So this gives you an idea of his skills at politicking. When the war was starting to break out, he hopped on the train and went to Washington, D.C., met with President Buchanan, who was hosting a meeting with 3 peace envoys from the South. Ben advised him to arrest the 3 for treason and to try them. And of course, he could be the lawyer. Opportunistic. In addition, now that he was armed with information from the War Department about what was coming, he turned around and went back to Lowell after meeting with the governor and explained, we're going to have to activate the militia. The militia are going to need to be clothed. How about if Middlesex Mills provides the heavy uniforms for them? And guess who got a 31% return on his stock investment? Are you getting a flavor for what Ben's all about? Ben's good at opportunities. So the war breaks out. Lincoln is inaugurated, calls up 75,000 troops. Simon Cameron, the Secretary of War, then called for 1,500 men. Massachusetts overachieved and came up with 6,000 troops. Two of them, you've probably heard the story of the Baltimore riots. So two of them embarked on trains for Washington, D.C., but the trains were not allowed to go through downtown Baltimore. No steam locomotives could go through. So you had to unload at one station and then march through town and connect to another one on a different railroad. And the 3rd and 6th departed one day ahead of time. Butler was with the 8th. To give you an idea of the geography here, so here's New York. So they came down from Boston to New York, then through Philadelphia to Baltimore to Washington was the plan. In reality, when he got called up, he was in the midst of a court case, and he had something like 500 pending court cases. And in one day, he packed his bags and was on the train. That's how dedicated he was. So fairly quick action. And that held up because the Massachusetts 6th got attacked and several people got killed. There was a bit of a riot there between the Copperheads and the Southern sympathizers and the Northern guys, including troops from Pennsylvania. And the bridges got damaged, and Maryland at that time was actually fairly pro-South. The governor and the mayor and the police chief were all pro-South. So they cut communications. Butler took his 8th Massachusetts, got a steamer, and managed, if I go back here, to sail around the cut railroad and telegraph lines and get down and around here and then go to Annapolis. So that's where he ended up landing. He was not supposed to do that. The governor had explicitly said no Massachusetts troops have any authority in the state of Maryland. Ben's reaction was, I have no orders. I'm carrying on the war on my own hook. I cut loose from my orders when I left Philadelphia. And Lincoln told him, stay there and try to pacify the people in Baltimore. Oh, he took that to heart. So here's, he basically, and I would love to find out more, he sent a captain from his group into town to reconnoiter, disguised as an organ grinder with a live monkey. Now, where do you order up a live monkey, right? Back then, no internet. So he took 1,000 troops and went to the top of the biggest hill, pointed his cannons at downtown Baltimore while having a beer in the local beer garden, and sent out proclamations to the people. And he's doing this all on his own. So he arrested people. Lincoln and Scott were outraged, but of course the northern newspapers just loved it. There's a picture of kind of what it looked like back then from the top of the hill. Lincoln might have said he didn't like it, but he invited him to the White House and promoted him to Major General. I gave a talk on Lincoln's secretaries. So Stoddard is one of the secretaries, and Ben shows up in full regalia. I'll give you a second to read some of the quotes. I like the end part. He was endlessly useful and endlessly troublesome, and only Dickens could do justice to him. Which kind of sums it up. Okay, let's talk about the Civil War. So the first assignment that he got was to Fort Monroe. Fort Monroe is down by Norfolk, Newport News. Important because if you control that waterway, it goes up to Richmond. It had actually, the fort had been badly neglected before the war broke out. So a lot of his job was just fixing the fort back up. Here's what it looked like. It even had an old hotel on it at the time. This is probably more what it looked like during the war. So it was a key staging ground for any northern ships that were provisioning campaigns in Virginia. I guess, Ben, you were in a play all about contrabands, is that right?
Yeah.
Okay. So some of you know the details here. A couple days after he got there, 3 slaves showed up, runaways. He basically invented an approach, being a good lawyer, that these slaves were contraband, and therefore under the rules of war, he was allowed to take possession of them. The Fugitive Slave Act did not apply because you can't ask us to use our laws. We're going to use your laws, and your laws say these people are contraband, and so I can take them. And that kind of forced the hand of Lincoln and some of the Northern congressmen. Nice image here. People really didn't know what to do, but it definitely caused a big controversy on both sides, and it got his name in the news. And I guess they say any news is good news, right, if you're a politician. So there's Ben for you. But by August, the Congress did come around and issue an act which made everything that happened legal and probably accelerated the Emancipation Proclamation. Okay, everybody good? Am I going too fast? You good? Happy?
Yep.
Okay. So at Fort Monroe, Scott promised troops, they labeled it the Department of Virginia. His was one of the first big battles, not that big a battle, but Big Bethel was the name of it. He planned it out, but he didn't personally supervise it. And they had friendly fire episodes happening in the middle of the night. So at 4 in the morning, you had the Union guys shooting at the other Union guys. So there were 18 people killed, including the first officers of the Civil War. Of course, when pressed, it was not his fault. This was poor execution on behalf of the officers. His plan was perfect, right? There was a joint Army-Navy operation down at Hatteras. The Navy part worked just fine. Ben's troops didn't really play a big role, but he claimed credit for it. And then after that, Lincoln decided to give him a rest. But he was really good at raising troops, and they needed more troops. So that's what he did. He raised more regiments, but of course fought with the governor on outfitting them. I'm sure the Middlesex Mills got a little more business as a side effect of all of this. Okay, now for the good part of the talk. Ready? So history, Louisiana was a very big city, 168,000 people, the biggest one in the South. The Confederates seized the mint. They were shipping half of all the cotton, 1.4 million bales, and were a key target for General Scott's Anaconda plan. Porter proposed a plan, and they actually kept Butler and McClellan out of the planning of it until the very last minute, when Butler was given troops and told to sail for Ship Island outside the port. The attack was 45 ships. They attacked the 2 forts down there on the entry to the New Orleans, south of them. And basically Farragut did the heavy lifting, and then Butler brought in his troops on May 1st. And then things really started to happen. So let's set this up a little bit. If you were marching in and you were the general and you were now in charge of the biggest Confederate southern city, what problems would you envision?
Feeding. Feeding people.
Feeding people. Yeah, what else?
Spies.
Spies. A lot of intrigue. What else?
Keeping order.
Keeping order. Yeah, riots.
Black market.
Black market. What was happening to the money? What do you think the banks were doing? Think about that for a second. I'll give you the answer.
Yellow Jack.
So it was definitely a belligerent city. People were starving. Blacks, on top of all the people that were there anyway, blacks were coming in from the plantation because they had heard what had happened before. And we have yellow fever season coming up. So a lot of people had died. The money was in a currency crisis. And because it was the biggest city, there were a lot of foreigners in town, a lot of consulates, and they were engaged in a lot of shenanigans. To his credit, Ben created a peaceful city with sound currency, put people back to work. They were fed. The blacks were productive too. The yellow fever problem got fixed. The one downfall, the consuls. And I'll give you some good stories on that. Here's Ben. with his staff in New Orleans, all doing the Napoleon pose, I guess. First crisis right away was Farragut told the mayor, take the Confederate flag off of the mint and put up the US flag. They would not do it. One of the civilians tore down the flag and was ripping it up as souvenirs. So he got arrested, and a military tribunal sentenced him to death, even though the wife and the 3 kids were begging for mercy. It was denied, and he was executed. Afterwards, Robert E. Lee wanted an explanation because of the rules of war. Jefferson basically said Butler should be hung, and then the newspapers in the South were putting bounties on his head up to $10,000. So now, on top of all your other problems, you got potential people that want to execute you, right? A little postscript. After the war, the woman had given her money to a preacher who stole it. And she actually talked to Butler, who got her a job with the IRS afterwards and helped support her. So it wasn't all bad. Here's the story that David told you about. So the women would insult, and if there was a streetcar, they would get off if any Union guys got on. They would even stand on the second floor balcony and moon the soldiers and moon Butler. So it was not a good situation. So Ben decided to, his first comment was, the women evidently know which end of them looks the best. So here's his general order number 28. His staff read it. I don't expect you to read it, but if you can, it basically says you are allowed to treat the women. It didn't say prostitute, a woman of the town plying her avocation. That's how he put it. His staff read it and said, you can't do this. You really cannot do this. And he said, okay, but if we have one case of aggression on our side, I will deal with it, and it will never be repeated. And it went out exactly as he drafted it. And there were no problems. Except overseas. Word about this went all over the South. This got him even more in the papers than the Mumford trial and execution, as you might imagine. And it even reverberated through the British House of Commons. So took a little heat on that one, but it got the job done, I guess would be one way to look at it. That would be the chamber pot David told you about. So what they do? They raided the red light district, got all the pots, brought them, and Benjamin started cracking them with a hammer. Here are other things that he did. Went after the newspapers. There was one newspaper that became the house organ for Butler's army, the Daily Delta. Took control of the churches. Canceled a day of memory that Jefferson Davis had proposed. He even sent 3 of the ministers off to New York, mandated loyalty oaths in order to keep running your business. The brother of Judah Benjamin from the Confederacy took it right in front of them. And basically his comment to the foreigners who were complaining crazily through the consuls was, if you don't like it here, go home. Period. So rather no nonsense. But his big problem was he had to run this place, but he didn't have any money. And because Lincoln had signed the Confiscation Act, that gave him some legal rights to confiscate the property of rebellious citizens and officers. But he basically took over the house of General Twiggs for his own personal use. And then, do you remember John Slidell? You heard that guy who was one of the 3 people going to France as an ambassador to get recognized. He basically took over his property too and made it available for his staff to live in his house. Here's the Spoon story. The Spoon story is on the right, but in the Twiggs home, they said, his daughter said, you have stolen the general's swords and the household silver. Basically, Butler said he sent the swords to President Lincoln, and he paid for the silverware and kept it himself. So that's Boone's. Yellow fever was a big deal. It had killed 10% of the population one of the years before the war. He actually brought in some experts that diagnosed what the problem was. The market was pretty filthy, a lot of flies, a lot of raw meat around, a lot of people getting sick. So he ordered it scrubbed, and they opened the gates and kind of flushed out the city from the water from the river, and it worked. In 1862, there were only 2 cases of yellow fever, which is a pretty phenomenal turnaround. Are you getting a little more sympathetic for Ben's ways? Some of you know, you're hard-hearted. So that became an opportunity to give work to everybody. So he hired people, including Black people, paid them all the same, ordered that you had to paint your house, keep it whitewashed, you had to clean up the refuse, and more or less cleaned up the city in a pretty good way. He had a lot of sympathy for the poor and orphans. There were funds that basically had been stolen and given to the Confederates. 11,000 bales of hay had been burned as the Union marched in. He viewed all of this as just a way that he could get back at those people and get more money. So he brought in the city council people that had squandered the trust for the orphans and told them they personally had to repay every cent of that. Otherwise, they'd be under guard. So he made food delivery to the poor happen. Before the war, or as the war broke out, a lot of the wealthy businessmen had subscribed, meaning they were willing to donate $1 million for the city's defenses. So enterprising Benjamin Franklin Butler got that list of people who donated and decided that every one of them now owed a 25% tax on whatever they owed to his fund for the poor. Basically $350,000 for poor relief. And when that money started running out, he just taxed them again. So they were supporting a quarter of the family's population at no cost to the US Treasury, which is a pretty big accomplishment. But wait, there's more. Now for the money problem. Here's the old Dixie notes. So a 10 note, I don't speak French, but how do you pronounce 10 in French? 10, okay. So that's what it looked like. And of course, the banks were local banks in many cases, and your money was backed by deposits of gold and silver. The banks, of course, tried to hide all their money as Union came in. They were quite clever, so they thought, but Benjamin Franklin Butler was even more clever than they were. So he basically said, Confederate money is now no good. We're going to issue new greenback money. And if you're a bank that wants to stay in business, you have to back the new money with your gold and silver. But there was a little problem because there wasn't really a lot of gold and silver in the banks anymore. So he had to flush it out of them. So he basically said, I know you've got your gold behind altars, they're in the tombs, they're somewhere. You better get it right back in your own vaults. Otherwise, if I find it, it's not your property anymore. I will use it for my purposes. But he did say, I will use my military troops to escort you to wherever you hit it, and then you can bring it back. So this is the new money. So of course, somebody wanted to go buy provisions. Yeah, buy provisions, get in the boat, go through the lines and go upriver. And so he gave him a pass, and guess what? He came back with $350,000 in gold, all packed as though it were beef. Right? He also explained that he would take back everything that they had stolen, like the mint, for example, from the United States. So he got on the order of $3 million from that, from the mint, the custom house, and then unpaid commercial transactions that when the war broke out, they said, we don't really owe you the money, we're going to keep whatever you shipped us. He also confiscated any of the Confederacy accounts because they had money in the Citizens Bank of Louisiana, so he took that too. So there were ways of getting money. people did try to hide money. A black informant told him that the Citizens Bank actually had moved all of their gold and silver into a liquor dealer who is his place is a Frenchman who had a vault. And they were flying the Dutch flag. Remember I said the consuls were going to be an issue? Okay, here's the beginning of that part of the story. So you have a French guy flying a Dutch flag, holding all the money from the Citizens Bank of Louisiana. And he said he didn't have anything, and that he wanted to talk to the French consul, a guy named Count Nahon. So Butler read the note, they came back, told his guys, go do the shakedown, get the key, go find the money. And guess what? They found $800,000 in Mexican silver that was packed away and hidden. And it did not have any of the seals that you would need to have on them if it were actually Dutch property as claimed. So he was able to confiscate that, or so he thought. But then, of course, the Dutch consul is going to get involved with the Dutch prime minister. And this is where Butler starts getting in trouble back in Washington, D.C., because the word goes out. They say it belongs to them. Their agent wants the Mexican silver coins back, and they're going to ship them off to Europe. But Butler, upon inspection, finds that there are all kinds of things wrong with that claim. And just to make problems worse, in the meantime, the French fleet is going to pay a visit to New Orleans, so a little dicey here. So he writes Stanton the following Okay. So you get the idea. Everybody could do shenanigans. Everybody could claim that, oh, I'm a Belgian citizen today. I'm going to fly my flag. I'm immune from the Ben Butler syndrome. It did go up the chain. There weren't any consular seals. Stanton apologized to the consul from Holland for the strip search, but he actually kept the money. In the meantime, 8 more consuls started complaining, and there were all kinds of shenanigans. The British consul had 60 people who had lived in Louisiana that now claimed British citizenship, and they were forming a British Guard. And there was a Greek vessel that had hoarded stuff in warehouses, but the minute that they opened the port, now shipping could start again. Ben would stop the ships and take a look at what was in there and look for the paperwork to see if it was legal shipment or not. So that all got disputed. More Washington, D.C. things. So this is a guy called Reverdy Johnson that got shipped to New Orleans to take a look at what was really happening again. Another discovery was on a Sunday. Somehow there was a commercial agreement signed, and $700,000 in coin was going to get moved out through, again, this French consul. So do you get the idea? I don't need to give you all the details of everything. Everybody was in cahoots to get the money out any which way they could, and they were using legal proceedings at the consular level to get the money out. There's correspondence. This is a purely commercial transaction, advantageous because of arbitrage. We can get a 3 to 4% return on our money. No way is this money being used for arms for the Confederacy. Just no way. Okay, except over in Belgium, the northern guy there found that shipments of the military supplies had been held up because they hadn't gotten their payment yet from New Orleans, and it all fell apart. So of course, Butler, just to make it all come to a head, I'm glad my action's been vindicated, and the government of the U.S. will be able to demand of that French consul that he get it recalled. Okay? You enjoying New Orleans? There's more. There's a lot more. Basically, in his autobiography, he lashed out. These little whippersnappers would complain, but it was just annoying. In the end, I was supreme. Having supreme power, I used it. Now, here's another part of the story. Ships coming in from the north, right? They're leaving. They come loaded with stuff, but we need to ship something back. So why don't we ship some useful stuff that maybe I, Ben Butler, can buy cheaply here in New Orleans, like sugar, and then we'll sell it when it gets to Boston. Okay. So stuff here, the price is turpentine for $3. It was $38 a barrel back in Boston. It worked the other way too. So flour that was $6 in the north could be shipped to the south and sold for $12. And Ben had complete control over shipping coming in and out, right? How do you think this worked out for him? Everything needed a permit. Problem was he got caught in Boston. The harbor master figured things out, and then more came in. So Montgomery Meigs, the quartermaster general, took a look at what was what and decided that they would pay Butler's expenses to ship these things, but the differential now belonged to the U.S. Treasury. So if you're Ben Butler and you get caught, what do? Nope. Bring in somebody else. And who better to bring in than your older brother? So Andrew Jackson Butler enters it. He started doing things like getting cattle over in Texas and then feeding the poor, and somehow the bills would all be increased and sent to be paid. A good trick was to forbid the sale of alcohol, right? And let his brother buy up all the alcohol that couldn't be sold, and then we'll lift the rules on alcohol. How do you think that worked out for Ben Butler? Pretty good. Basically, his brother accumulated at least $1 to $2 million. And when Banks took over, David talked about General Banks coming in and replacing him. They offered him a bribe of $100,000 if the brother could continue with the Butler operation. Secretary of the Treasury got involved. He sent a couple of people to investigate. They found that Butler controlled everything, and basically he too had made $1 to $2 million. Good example was salt shipments on Lake Pontchartrain. So salt was a very scarce commodity for the South because there were only a couple places where you could get salt for the meat. So there were 100 sacks, and they cost $2 each to go across the lake. And then the Confederates were going to pay $25 a bag, and civilians had to pay $36. And he and his brother just made money hand over fist for all of that kind of stuff. It was too much. Basically, on December 12th, he got notice that he was being replaced by Nathaniel Banks. He had his own problems. But they shipped him down. How did people feel about Butler? Well, you would think Farragut, who was with him on taking over the city, said they can say what they please about General Butler, but he was the right man at the right place in New Orleans. Of course, there were a lot of posters, the tyrant of New Orleans. On the other hand, one of my favorite quotes was, the motto for Louisiana politics is, we don't tolerate corruption, we demand it. And you thought things were bad now, right? So basically, Nathaniel Banks came in and undid a lot of the orders almost immediately. You can see the lengthy list there. No privileges, citizens can pass freely. All the federal officers living in houses that they just took over got kicked out. They reopened the churches and basically calmed everything down. So Seward was happy with him because those annoying consuls and foreign ministers weren't in his office all the time complaining about New Orleans. Ben's not done. He goes to Washington, D.C. on his way back home. At this point, he starts thinking about supporting the radical Republicans. He had been a Democrat before. They loved what Butler had been doing, but he needed a new assignment. And Lincoln was in a bit of a pickle because Butler was very popular with the newspaper reporters and all the activities. he kept asking, why did I get recalled? No one would give him a straight answer. He didn't like that. In the meantime, at every stop, people would meet the train, a lot of cheering. His reputation was very good. In the North, Jefferson Davis branded him a felon and put a price on his head. And Lincoln came very close. There's a letter in Lincoln's hand that he wrote, can't read it, but it basically proposes that they should send Butler back to New Orleans again. And we cannot dispense with his services. But he put that letter in his desk and he never had it executed. But that shows you how close Lincoln was to sending Ben back if there were more problems in New Orleans. Okay, we'll wrap up on the military campaigns with Bermuda 100 and Fort Fisher, and then talk about post-war. We're doing okay on time. Yeah, so Lincoln was in a stronger position at one point. There was a rumor that he was going to offer Grant's armies to Ben Butler, but that never happened. He actually got his old position at Fort Monroe. They renamed it the Army of the James. Lincoln's goal was that Butler would report to and help Grant win what turned out to be the Overland Campaign in May and June of 1864. So now he's back at Fort Monroe. Hey, there's an opportunity to make a little bit of money while you're waiting for something to do. Some of the farmers in the what's called Dismal Swamp area, 6 counties in North Carolina, went back and forth, and they were bringing in cotton that they would buy from the Confederate government, and then they would trade it for medicine and other things that they could not easily get in the South. Salt, sugar, cash, supplies. This wasn't a small operation. This was about 10,000 pounds of bacon, sugar, coffee, and codfish daily for the Army. About $100,000 per day was slipping through. And you can see what Grant wrote. While the Army is holding Lee and Richmond and Petersburg, Lee's getting supplies either through, I like how polite he is, inefficiency, or the permission of an officer selected by General Butler. So he kind of got caught. Okay, the Overland Campaign will talk about Petersburg, the cork in the bottle, and the Howlett line. Oops, that was interesting. So let me set this up. So Petersburg is down on the south part of the map down here. Basically, Grant is coming in battle, Cold Harbor, Spotsylvania, comes down to Petersburg. The piece of it that they gave to Butler was to come up to past City Point to the tip of the Bermuda 100 and then unload people here and then march on Petersburg, which had a railroad and a turnpike. And it should be pretty easy. So attack Petersburg, destroying rail links, take it, and force Lee into a multi-front battle. They had a 7-to-1 troop advantage at the beginning. Grant did not trust Butler, so he gave him 2 generals, Smith and Gilmore. He got the order to commence. He left Hampton Roads on transports, ships, got to City Point on the 9th, or 7th, frightened the Confederates because there were only 10,000 Confederate troops, and he had 35,000 with only 1,000 railroad guards at Petersburg and a bunch of teenagers defending Richmond at the time. So he would have thought, had he had some initiative and got to work right away, he could have accomplished the goal. But did Ben do that? Not so much. Basically, it gave them plenty of time for Beauregard to assemble enough troops that he could stop him. And every time they stopped him, Ben got a little more conservative and started digging trenches instead of attack. So he's at the opposite end of the spectrum from Grant's strategy. Federal troops are safe, but impotent. So here are the minor skirmishes, not too important. As I said, Grant just kept attacking. And in the meantime, Butler's down here just holed up with the cork in the bottle. This is what his headquarters look like. He basically argued with his two generals that he was given for 3 days. Just like I said, started digging trenches. And then when they attacked, that definitely made them just sit there for more than 2 weeks. So they sent a guy named Bernard to investigate. Grant asked why couldn't he move out and take the railroad, and this is where the guy came back with the cork in the bottle, that basically he couldn't move forward. No one could attack him, so he was safe, but it was just therefore going to be a big stalemate. So it's like Butler's in the bottle, he's safe against attack, but the enemy corked the bottle. So the Howlett line was a cannon line that they quickly threw up to keep the Union troops stymied. It was 3 miles long. This is roughly what it looked like. He did get a break. That was May and June. People were pretty disgusted with him. They did detach 3,000 people and sent Butler up to New York because the election was going on and there were supposed to be some shenanigans coming. So that got him out of everybody's hair for a little bit, even though there were a lot of threats. Nothing happened, but it demoralized the conspiracy people in New York City and prevented any havoc. Fort Fisher was another big Butler problem. So Fort Fisher is in North Carolina. It guards the entrance to Wilmington, the last port to be closed down by the Anaconda campaign. Big earthworks. They again assigned Porter to go solve the problem with a little bit of help from Ben Butler. When Ben found out about it, he decided he had a better idea by let's take a Navy ship and put 300 tons of gunpowder on it, and we'll explode it right offshore. Convinces Porter to buy in. Grant's pretty dubious about this, but allows it to go ahead, but make sure that we capture the work. So he imposes himself. A soldier from New York said, "Old Butler is here and will perhaps command the expedition in order to assure its failure." Which gives you an idea that he didn't exactly have the troops behind him, right? So, of course, you know the theme now, it gets all screwed up. And part of it was a rendezvous problem, so the troop transports didn't get there at the same time as the gunboat and the powder boat. And so because of bad weather, one guy went to Beaufort and then he came back out and the other one went to Beaufort, not at the same time. So basically the Navy guy said, here's the date and time when I'm going to attack. If you're here, great. If not, too bad. Attacked, nothing really happened. The powder boat didn't work. Butler came and instead of doing a full frontal attack by unloading his troops, he unloaded some of them to go do reconnaissance. And then of course they're kind of stranded when the bad weather kicks back up again. So a bit of a problem there. And at that point, Grant wrote Stanton, you know, I got to get rid of this guy. It's just, you know, if I'm not watching him, he's going to command, and if he commands, he's going to totally screw it up. So his administration of everything is also objectionable. I'm sure that gets back to the dismal swamp, $100,000 a day. So on January 7th of 1865, Ben wasn't really in charge of much of anything anymore. Was he done? No. So he's going to go home by way of Washington, D.C. And I gave a talk on the Joint Committee on the Conduct of the War, the helpful investigations that the congressmen were doing. So he happened to get a hearing so he could bring in his charts and show them the beauty of his plan and how it wasn't really his fault that things didn't go quite well. He claimed the fort was impregnable and, you know, no one was going to be able to do it. That was a little problem for Ben that day. Let's just say it was not a good day when the newsboy came in and said that they had reattacked and taken the fort. Okay, after the war, if you can't read it, the legend down there says the Bay State spider. The old lady says, drat that spider. He's never done spinning his web. I've tried for years to drive him out of the house and he was as busy as ever. Oh, was he? So he comes back, he manages to run for and get into the House in Congress in 1867 for several years and actually helped Grant. And then he moved into the Senate where they approved the appointments. His wife died along the way. And then he went back to Massachusetts. He stopped his Senate office early and went back and ran for governor once and lost, and then ran for governor and won. And then he actually, governor was only for 2 years, and then he ran for president. So we'll talk briefly about that. Some interesting history, even though he was new, he ran in 1866, became a House of Representatives representative in 1867. He actually was the House manager for the impeachment hearings for Andrew Johnson. And they only lost by 1 vote. So that indicates he may have done a pretty good job on that. He was not supportive of Grant, but then when Grant won, he kind of switched gears and made a lot of recommendations for appointments that had to go through the Senate. Of course, the comment was the worst appointments were Butler's suggestion and the worst acts were under Butler. But I don't think that's completely true. They blamed him for a lot of stuff. In fact, some of the good things that he did in Congress, he drafted, and the Ku Klux Klan Act in 1871. He and Charles Sumner did the first version of the Civil Rights Act. He had a hard time when he was running for Congress because people would kind of dangle spoons behind him. So politics hasn't changed a lot, right? He was still fighting for a 10-hour workday, and then he ran for president on the Greenback Party ticket. So that was his political career. Puck magazine had some interesting photos that I thought were great on the front page. You know, he basically wanted to be governor. Along the way, he did a variety of other good things that I think he should get some credit for. He bought, during the war, you have to wonder about this, confiscated farms in Norfolk and made them into co-ops for African Americans. He sponsored a scholarship for African Americans at Philip Sandover. He served on the board and was the president of the board for the first VA hospitals that got put up, and those were all, by all accounts, done fairly well. During the governor campaign, people were trying to highlight that the VA hospital was another act of corruption, but basically compared it to the Danvers insane asylum. He basically had the VA hospital could house 8,000 people for the same cost as one insane asylum for 500 people. So it wasn't all bad. Here he won the governorship. Puck has him now as an angel. That's a bit of a stretch, I think. But because he owns control over the money, patronage jobs, and vetoes over everything, he has a fair amount of power. Here he is campaigning for president, all dressed up, just like the secretaries talked about when he saw Lincoln for the first time. And he ended up dying in Washington, D.C. You might ask about the money. He did fairly well as a lawyer. He died with $7 million in money back in those days, which would be more like $210 million. So he was not exactly, he was buried in Lowell, in a nice quote on tombstone. So, how do you feel about Ben Butler now? Ben Butler, how do you feel about Ben Butler?
I think he was amazing at very specific things.
Very politic. Okay. There are many, many things that you can read. This is his official autobiography. It is way too long, 1,000 pages, which means he must have kept every paper he ever did. I had no interest in reading all of that. The Civil War Monitor in 23 in the spring had a kind of a revisionistic relook at Ben Butler. That's easy to read. I already had this slide deck done by then, so it was a good recap. I would give it a good gold star. There are some other books that came out along the way. A good, really easy and easy to read, fun to read, and it's only 44 pages and it's free online, would be this quote, true record of General Benjamin Butler. So if you want to read free things online, you can get the slides and go take a look at that. And then, of course, a lot of Wikipedia articles that just add a little frosting to the cake along the way. And here's a revisionistic thing that's out on historynet.com. Okay, got to the finish line. This was actually talk number 16 in the talks that I've done. I opened at the beginning with Paul Harvey. So these are, I don't do the battles by and large, I do the rest of the story. So if you're interested in any of these topics and want the slide deck, I'm happy to ship them out to you. That gives you an idea of the panorama of things. The next talk is going to be on barons of the Civil War, not robber barons necessarily. There were good guys, bad guys. You've heard about the people that made the blankets that fall apart the first time they're used, but on the other hand, there are companies that are still around today. So Squibb on medications, Armour for canned meat, Borden for condensed milk. All of those people did a pretty good job during the war. So that would be the next one. And maybe reporters will be the one after that. So you've been quite attentive. No one fell asleep that I could see. So I'm a happy guy. And I guess we can take questions, right?
Before we get to questions, I just wanted to remind everybody we're doing a silent auction for a limited edition Don Troiani print out there. It was there when you came in there. So if you do want to make a bid on it, you can do that on your way out. Now back to our speaker.
Okay.
Questions?
It's a little hard to see, but if you shout out, yes, here.
Yes, sir. Other than his brother, did any of his immediate family come with him to New Orleans? Wife, children?
I don't think so. Oh, actually, that's wrong. The wife did. The wife was there, and I think the children were there at the beginning. He had to make sure it was safe before they showed up. But actually, he was pretty fearless. He would ride around town in a carriage, and you would have thought, with the price on his head, bad things could have happened at any point in time. But I'm pretty sure in this book, they talk about the wife. So this is one of the books that I was recommending. Yep, other questions? Yep, back here.
It seems very hard to kind of pin down what his real motivations were, because on the one hand, I mean, he did a lot of things that were very beneficial for the Union cause. But on the other hand, if I understood you correctly, he also was basically making money off of feeding the Confederates at the same time that Grant was trying to interrupt the supplies. So was there any, did he have like letters to his wife or a diary or anything like that that told us what he was really thinking when he was doing all these things? Because they seem almost.
Yep. Everybody hear the question?
Yeah.
So 2 quick answers. One is read the autobiography, because I'm sure he has comments in there. I don't know that letters to the wife was in there. He was questioned multiple times by the Committee on the Conduct of the War, where people would bring up things that they didn't like, and they never went after him. And they were big on going after fraud. So either he hid it really, really well, or the things he were doing were legal. Maybe not morally right, but legal at the time. Yep, next to you. Yep.
At a very high level, can you compare and contrast Butler to other political generals?
To the other,
Political generals.
Other political generals at a very high level, compare and contrast Butler to other political Union generals. Were they similar to him, or were they much different? And he was kind of the odd one.
I think he rated #1 in notoriety, would be my guess. I mean, the other ones were known for other things, and I'm not well versed in all of the other political generals, so I can't really answer that question. Maybe that would be a good talk down the road. Compare and contrast. Were you a history teacher? That sounds like a history of
No,
something.
I was kind of interested in
Yeah.
whether he was typical political general or whether he was very
Yeah.
different. And,
I actually started in that direction. One of the talks I
put together was the boys from Illinois with regiments from around me, and a lot of the generals, some of the generals were Illinois political generals. I started getting into that, but the talk was already too long, so didn't want to. But that would be a good topic. I just don't have much of an answer on it.
Did he have any military successes? You pointed out a number of his failed campaigns. Did he do anything successful as a leader of tactics?
I'm sorry. Did a lot of other things. Other talks over here.
I think ultimately Ben Butler's actions, especially in New Orleans, saved lives. And I can't think of any better yardstick to measure in general.
Yeah. I mean, you have to give him credit for the yellow fever stuff. I mean, that's pretty amazing to go from losing 8,000 people one year to 2. Yeah. And seeking out the experts who knew the answer to the question, and then transforming that problem into an opportunity for employment for people. And yeah, it was very clever. I'll give him that. Yep.
The one thing that stands out to me is what he did for the enslaved people during the war and then afterwards.
Yep. Yeah, I didn't put much in there, but that could be a whole section on itself. But yeah, give him credit for that. Are you coming around now?
Yeah.
Yep.
Why was he so hesitant in front of Petersburg and Richmond? What, they just fooled him and he didn't think that he had the force to force his way in, or he just...
I don't know if it was bad intelligence, whether the generals under him might have undercut him. I can't say that for a fact. People, I think it was starting to get a little gun shy given all of his failures, even though he had a numerical advantage. If he didn't have the intelligence to know that, and all of a sudden a noted general like Beauregard is showing up with troops, he might have gotten gun shy. But I'm with you. I would have thought, given how energetic he was in every other dimension, why he didn't go full bore and follow the orders, make Grant happy, and turn around his reputation. It would have been a huge opportunity for him. Right? Yeah. Anything else? It's hard to say. Okay, thanks for being here. I hope you like that.
Did you ever read Richmond Redeemed? Go read it.
Okay.
A good friend of mine wrote it 40 years ago. A guy named Richard Summers. He was a brilliant guy who passed away. He has a big part of the book is about Butler planning what would become known as Grant's Fifth Offensive. Butler has a particular facility for strategic planning. And Grant relies on Butler to help devise the operation.
I should put that in because I do know
Enjoyed your trip.
But you said that he was selling stuff to the Confederacy. So,
That's excellent. Thank you.